Welcome to Warblog. Today I'm going to talk about a few things about AI and developments I've been sort of doing with the site. I've had ChatGPT send me a bunch of news articles each day relating to modern war around the world, and today it sent me one on El-Fasher Siege in Sudan, which I didn't really know much about. And this is sort of why I jumped into it, because the thing is, the only thing on my sort of horizon at the moment is Ukraine. And to be quite honest, I mean, I've done this video before, but you can see that nothing's happening in Ukraine, because this is the road to Pokrovsk, February, and they're still on the road to Pokrovsk in August. They still haven't taken it. So there's virtually nothing happening. There are some developments, and to be quite honest, I mean, I would be doing it a little more actively if I had more time, so that it's not just that there's nothing happening. I'm being distracted in other ways. But one of my big distractions was the fact that the server was quite slow, and it was always sort of, I sort of really needed to sort that out. But it's actually it's super performing now. So anyway, I get this newsletter, and I saw this one for El-Fasher, and I thought, oh well, I'll do that. Because it's the first one in the list of things that I saw. But so I actually got AI to, I'd say, do design support, so it can interrogate the map, and it can do tweaks with the map. So the AI put on quite a few of those urban areas and the scrub areas. The AI put in the Zamzam camp down there. It put on the road name. It put it over here, but so it is actually something that I can use. I want to use the word support because, to be quite honest, it seems to be one of those things that takes longer to do it with AI than it does to do it myself. I'm constantly saying no, that's not right. Something stupid has happened. But the thing is, the fact that it can interrogate the map and it can return me a map, which is basically a very long array, and it understands that map, and it can change, I can say, using your best experience, show me the full extent of El-Fasher, the city. And that's what it did. It added these. So, and then I said, well, the darker green areas are scrub, convert those areas into the scrub tile, and it did that. And basically I'm beginning to wonder whether there's anything actually more involved than just having a scrub tile, but maybe not. But basically, so it added all of these. All I did was put 2 there and 2 there, and to be quite honest, the scrub was a little more extensive than that. So, but the thing is, if I can throw a map at it and I can say improve this map, by adding as many features as you can identify, it knows how to put the names in. It knows how to change certain terrain types. It only knows desert, scrub, urban and dense urban at the moment, because that's all it's been shown. It can sort of create roads, but it hasn't done so yet. But it understands that the whole roads have to be complete and things like that. So it can provide me with design support for the map, but also it created this whole in order of battle. It created everything. All I did was seed it with 2 units, one for the defenders, one for the attackers. And after I got to a certain stage, I introduced alternative elements within the same force. It had a little bit of difficulty with that, because I started off with, because you can see these units are pretty much the same. These are the Sudanese Armed Forces, and these are basically the rebels. So they were Sudanese Armed Forces, but now they're rebels, now they're Rapid Support Forces. So the only difference there is that they've got this little emblem there, and it's a bit more squashed in their designation. So they were all looking like that. So then I said, okay, what we're putting in here now is the default, because in the report I said to ChatGPT, give me an overview of what's happening here, because I don't really understand what's happening. What are the important things that I need to be considering? And it gave me this quite a long, sort of like about 2-page worth overview stating that the defenders were the Sudanese Armed Forces with the Darfur Joint Forces, and so I added a Darfur Joint Force under the banner of the Sudanese Armed Forces, but I didn't quite grasp that. So it didn't sort of understand that they were underneath that they were underneath the Sudanese Armed Forces. They thought that they were a unit in their own right, so a force in their own right, like there were 3 or 4 players. But you come to these sort of conclusions or terms because you can ask it to put things into hard memory, where it will remember over time that there's only 2 sides, and you could have things that sound similar. For example, here you've got rapid support forces, and the rapid support forces are in the rapid support forces. It just happens that's their name. And the Arab militias that are helping them are in there. So we started off just with this and just with these, and then I added these in. So I said, given that you've got these units, distribute them as you like. So you've got the same sort of proportions, density as you had before, the defender and attacker. So it created the whole thing. And then I added artillery units. I said we've also got some artillery units for the rapid support forces, and I suggested 2 or 3, and it put in 2, and then I added another one. I didn't do the I did the Air Force myself. That's strange. No, these should not be with the rebels. These are with the government forces. Let me just change that. Yeah, that's a small detail. Fresh on the keyboard. Yeah, because they've got 3 bits of artillery, but the government forces have air power. So anyway, basically, ChatGPT has been helping me do this, which is really quite interesting. And I did actually did a video on this before, and then it didn't work, and I thought, I know, what is it? And, well, I had a bit of a problem with file permissions, and some files got deleted, and the thing wasn't there. So I'm going to push some of this over this way. I mean, let's just see how much of this actually works. The other thing we had a problem with was with remembering that. So let's just reload this. Yes, it's remembered that. So let's just fire on that stack. Yeah, we can get there with 1 unit. So we'll fire on it. Oh, 1.8, 1.6. So it all seems to be sort of working as it should do. I'm not expecting errors now. One thing that doesn't work, and I'm not going to sort this out yet, but the pen tool. Stopped working. Now I've no idea why that might have even been. Now this is a more kinetic sort of game. Okay, we've got 7-1 odds, so that's 18-2, and we got die roll of 9. I rushed the setup. I sort of thought I shouldn't really give them all mobile units, but I did. So they're getting these extra attacks, but it was just out of laziness because I didn't want to create another counter. I was just trying to test ChatGPT to see what it could do. So obviously we were able to push these units out of the city there a bit. We should have similar odds against this guy. No, that was just a 2-to-1. I wonder what the differences were. There were. Probably don't need this much, but I feel like just doing it like that. Okay, 7-to-1. DR. Now we've moved. So I'm not going to do much more because I don't really want to really start thinking about all the strategy. My brain is sort of not working particularly well at the moment. I've been a little ill and I've been thinking hard on developing this. So actually sitting down and playing it like a game is it's not something that's sort of it's not easy, because my mind is sort of wrapping over all the sort of the internals and sort of, you know, I'm not just thinking about the strategy, I'm trying to think about why my pen tool doesn't work and whether there are any other errors, and I'm also thinking about all the other things that need to be done. For example, one of the things that's also been binding me down is the nature of the Ukraine war, is that it's not dynamic, there's not much happening, but a lot of it is been moved over to drones, and I've got all that capability and that functionality in, but the problem I've got at the moment is that it's more the air side of things. So for example, I could put in a bunch of drones and a bunch of F-16s, and the drones could fight the F-16s. Well, it doesn't happen like that. They're in different leagues. So somehow what I want to do is to somehow tailor the environment, the game environment, to better suit the drone saturation situation. So I don't really want to have 20 drones appearing each time. I don't know, but the thing is, I really don't know how I'm going to do it, because I think one of the things that we've got going on in the Ukraine is that there's a lot of drones being used, but there's a lot of counter-drone technology. There's a lot of anti-drone armaments, netting and things like that. And this whole drone type, environment, it seems that that's something that could really be amplified, and to some extent I don't know, because I know there's a lot more of the sort of behind lines bombardment, but they make more out of it than it really is. There's no Dresden's going on, but I think that's again is sort of the slow attrition. So the Ukraine war is a slow attrition, preparing for the winter offensive, as you might think, as you might sort of call it, but that's sort of where things are really going to make a difference. Whereas what's happening is sort of on the front line is just so slow, but it's very much sort of, I mean, I don't know. I only look at South Front really, and that's only sort of, periodically. I mean, I look at it quite a lot and feel guilty for not doing any scenarios and get depressed and don't look at it. Sometimes I don't look at it because I know that I should be doing those, and there's not just one, there's like 10. It's such an overload of things I should be doing, and then I haven't done anything. But what I'm getting to is that it seems that there's, you could say, 50% of the troops and forces on the field are basically drone operators now. It's basically these two teams of drone operators fighting each other. They're even blowing up each other's drone operation teams. There really aren't any people left firing machine guns at each other. But But it's not as simple as that. I saw some other videos with some very fast tank action. I mean, these are tanks moving really quickly, and the drones are catching up with them. But they are, they're quite obviously speeding. So these vehicles are going at least like 50 miles an hour, maybe more, along these dirt tracks. All the dust coming up, and the drones are catching up with them and blowing them up. But I think I think there's no doubt that drones and drone technology and the electronic and counter-electronic technology is really key. There's simply no doubt about that, and I do want to capture that in the game. But I think what I'm trying to suggest is that there's got to be a degree of sort of cautiousness or caution on how you interpret that, because that's all we see. I saw some recent footage of an indication that the Ukrainians did a sort of one of their sort of counterattacks, almost harking back to, I think it's 2023, when they did their sort of spring offensive, where they actually had the big clever tanks and armored vehicles. Because when you don't see a lot of that, I always said right at the beginning they shouldn't bother with all this expensive stuff, because they're only going to get blown up. They should just buy loads of Toyota pickup trucks, because they're only going to go out there for one use. They're going to go out and get hit and destroyed, but they don't cost as much. And that they have been doing that. You see them driving around now in pickup trucks, because they just want to get from place to place. And to some extent, the pickup trucks are better because you can get out of them a lot quicker. The other thing I've always noticed, and no one's ever really sort of I don't know. I don't really hear anyone sort of talking about these sorts of things. Is sort of the counter drone technology, and there are people out there. I saw, they were using heat sensor sites, heat sites, so they could see the drones because they emit heat, their battery packs and motors, and they can then shoot them. But it would seem to me that for every unit that you had, you'd have someone on overwatch with a shotgun, because the shotguns are exactly the sort of things. It's like clay pigeon shooting. The shotguns are exactly the sort of thing that would take out a drone, because the span of the shot expands. And you would have thought that they would, because you see all these people driving around as the drones are coming in after them, and they just seem to be startled and run away, whereas you would have thought that I wouldn't be afraid of a drone. The moment I saw a drone, my ears would perk up and I'd reach for my shotgun, presumably got one. And there's all sorts of other things that they don't do that I would have done, harking right back to the time when they were all treading on mines, and they should just have these massive like riot shields, but a bit wider, that you could place on top of the mines, because the thing is that the mines are not anti-tank mines. They're just things that, fire shrapnel, and you could easily cover that over with a mat and it would absorb all of the shock, because it's not enough to actually lift a mat with the weight of a person on it. What happens is that the shrapnel passes through clothing and into flesh, which is soft as butter. It's not going to go through a heavy Kevlar defensive mat that has handles on it that can be lifted up into sort of a sort of a defensive posture like a Roman shield. So you could have one of those, and you could have a team of those, and you would just have, I imagine that you could take out every drone there is, because if it's going to drop on you from above, you use your shield to shield you from above. Because it seems to me, when you watch these people being blown up, there was one shot recently of a man who was trying to surrender, and the Ukrainians were trying to shoot him for surrendering, and he was just walking along, and some sort of bomb falls down next to him. You see it explode. It doesn't seem to touch him. He seems it's scratching himself because he's obviously been hit in some way, but it doesn't really, it's not like in the films. I saw a film yesterday, it was a load of crap, but someone walked into a bar. I can't remember what it was called. It was just a load of rubbish, but it was quite a big budget film. And he walked into a bar with a grenade, and he went in, and it's about some terrorist thing, and I have to hunt down these terrorists. I wish I could remember it and make more sense when I'm recording a video. But anyway, he walked into this bar and he threw a grenade out, and the whole pub exploded. The explosion from the grenade burst a gas pipe, a gas main, and the gas exploded, and then the whole, so it basically blew everyone up, every window up, everyone was flying through the air. And then it also ruptured a gas main, which then meant the whole pub just exploded into a massive ball of flame. And I thought, no, that's just rubbish. That's not how these grenades are working. It's obvious. You can watch them when they're blowing people up in on these videos in the Ukraine, that they can land right next to them, and it's just like a poof, like that. And sometimes they fall over and start writhing around, but other times they just carry on walking around, and they often look not particularly startled or concerned. It's sort of like they're just carrying on because that one obviously missed. They've obviously got a different sense of priorities and understanding about how these things work. But the point I'm trying to get to is if that's the nature of these explosives, these protective shields, these sort of Kevlar shields, and a shotgun, you would just go out and laugh at the drones, and you don't see that. You don't see people laughing at the drones. I would. So many of these drones, you can see that, you could probably, you could hear them coming in, you can see them coming in, and, it'd be like a sort of a Good, the Bad and the Ugly film, where they're just super cool and they just shoot it at the last moment. But, a shotgun would take out all of these things, and your shield would protect you from any sort of, flying, fragments or anything like that. But that's just something else, really. I was just sort of thinking, the nuts and bolts of the game should reflect what's happening in some of these conflicts. And so this El-Fasher one, it's more kinetic. There are no drones being used here that I'm aware of. It's really more sort of, and this is probably not really how it's happening. This, if anything, it's just small squads. I don't know what's happening with regards to the connections of this struggle. But the siege here, and I probably will write it up actually properly now that I can get ChatGPT to do that. The siege here has been going on for over a year, and the whole point of the news article is that people are starting to starve, and it's a major siege, and this scenario reflects that. To be quite honest, I don't know what my map would look like if I hadn't had ChatGPT, because I didn't really develop it that much. It seems to be, if you look at El-Fasher on a map, it doesn't even look like a town. It doesn't even look like anything on a desert map, because it's all sort of brown, and the brown goes into the brown on the desert. It's hard to figure out that it's the biggest city in the Darfur region, and it's the last major major city held by the Sudanese government in the Darfur region, so to speak. So it's a big place, and when you look at it on the Google Earth, so to speak, where you could see the physical buildings, it is vast. It's a massive sprawling city, which the map doesn't really do justice to. There's got to be lots of features. There's an airport under here. There's an airport under there. That's the refugee camp. So yes, but when it comes down to the Ukraine, I think that I really want to sort of somehow leverage in that drone type counterbalance there. But anyway, I'll leave it at that. I mean, it's the second video I've done in a while, and it's the first one where I completed the scenario and even made an attempt to play it. I'm really got a lot of things to do, but hopefully if ChatGPT can keep giving me news. I mean, I know I could get this news before, but it was often quite difficult to find. I've had a few stumbling blocks. I mean, other than personal things and time and the server if difficulties, which was just more psychological rather than practical, because to be honest, it's always been working. But what I'm saying difficulties is that there's quite a lot happening that I haven't really been able to get my head around fully and completely. In particular, the whole Gaza situation, because I know there's the initial advance on Gaza and all the Hamas counterattacks, and they're doing in their brand new offensive into Gaza. You know, the Lebanon incursion. I haven't done any of those things. I haven't covered them, and it's not so much a stumbling block as I sort of well, what I'm saying is I didn't not do them because they were very sensitive. I did not do them because of the nature of the Gaza situation. It was really just because I think that they're quite complex, and I've just been so busy. But the thing is, knowing that I've got sort of caught up and stumbling on those items has sort of prevented me from doing other things. And now I just sort of look back. I mean, it's easier to sort of understand what I'm trying to say if you even care about what I'm trying to say. When you look back at sort of, you know, just this time when I was doing loads of stuff. Look, 8th of February, 9th of February. Oh, no. These are the, so this doesn't necessarily mean that's when I did it. You know, but I was doing it a lot, and it was just really easy to do, and I was doing lots of stuff, and you know, I seem to have got quite bogged down in the fact that, because once you sort of find yourself not able to do what's sort of coming up in the news, it becomes, you know, I was on a sort of a roller coaster ride back then. It was just so easy to go from one to the other and to the other and then to the other. But I think that the Gaza situation, the Lebanon situation, you know, even the Mayana situation, which I really, really, really want to cover. I remember doing a video, I'm going to do this. You know, because of the complexity of these things, I think because the Syria things, it always seems so simple and easy to understand and comprehend. Just put a map together, it's just some desert and stuff like that. But in the Ukraine, it's so much more complicated and involved. And I think the lack of absolute kinetic direction, you know, leads to sort of, well, what's the point in doing this? Because it's exactly the same scenario as it was last week. You know, they've made sort of like, you know, they've captured 100 square meters. They're still, you know, they're still marching on Pokrovsk after 6 months. So, but anyway, I'll leave it at that. But hopefully, now that I've got these prompts from ChatGPT, and now that I can maybe get ChatGPT to support, you know, to speed up the process in some capacity, I'm going to have to bear in mind that if I try to get it to do it perfectly, it'll probably take me 10 hours a day. So I'm going to have to sort of try and figure something out there. But yeah, I'm going to start really trying to get more going, because basically, you know, this whole platform, I mean, you just have to look at how many scenarios there are. That means there's over 1,000 scenarios. You know, there's 1,000 and sort of 10, because that marks the end of 1,000, 1,010, coming up to 1,020 scenarios. You know, that's a lot of work, and it's all in there. And what I'm also been thinking about doing was integrating some elements of this with OpenAI, which ChatGPT will be able to sort of help me develop, to actually integrate some sort of degree of AI into the game. However, ChatGPT, we had a conversation, and it was amazing, because we both agreed that, you know, the sort of the art of these sorts of games is to really try and make them more conversational, which is how I've always done it. You know, I sort of would always pause at something and sort of say, well, okay, what does this actually mean? What has just happened here? You know, so we can go back into this, and you know, we can say, okay, well, we've just done this one thing here. So we can come up with some news reports or stories coming in of, say, the rapid support forces have marched north through El-Fasher, defeating, you know, elements of the the Sudanese Armed Forces. So, we're talking about the little battle that went on there, the little battle that, but however, further to the northeast, similar encounters met with much fiercer resistance, with the with the Sudanese Armed Forces holding their ground. And then, you can talk about each one of these situations and scenarios, and this advance down here. So we made 2 advances and one impasse, and then creating, the essentially the equivalent of a press release for that happening, and reading more into something. And that's the conversational art of it. And ChatGTP still says, that's fine, I love all that. That's exactly how things should be, so that you can get people thinking rather than just trying to roll dice and decide, what sort of permutations is going to favour them getting the result they want, as opposed to playing how you would intuitively want to play, which is how I sort of like it to go. And it's fine, but when you realise that ChatGTP is good at talking the talk but not walking the walk, you can sort of say, well, yeah, because it will say things like, I think I read some of the results out. It gave me some things. It gave me some advice. Well, it's given me loads of advice. I'm not going to go through it all, but the last one it did, I showed it the map I did versus the map it did. And it said, yes, your redeployment absolutely matches what you've been pushing for. Encirclement is clear. You've got continuous cordon, not just the southern mass, which is what it had. That sells the siege and stops easy breakouts. So it understands, about the siege, and it understands that it's stopping easy breakouts. The story reads well. Pressure from the east along Mellet Road. It's talking about the Mellet Road, leveraging these names as sort of, narrative structures. Secondary weight in the south with thin pickets west and north to keep defenders penned. So he's got this idea of thin pickets, but to be quite honest, there's actually quite a thick line there. Almost, it's quite even. So it doesn't quite understand the reality of the situation. And it says, and they always, ChatGTP always offers some extra advice, something that you might want, to have done. A few small tweaks if you want to sharpen it further. No new units needed. A thin northern screen. Keep 1 to 2 light stacks stacked up there, but stagger them so every urban approach is covered while keeping the 1 hex gap. So it's given me these ideas for strategy, but it doesn't really sort of match into sort of how you might sort of think about it, because they're all within striking distance of the city. That's why we're encircling it. It's got point 2 is artillery geometry. Split the 3 RSF. So it's got, these are the RSF units, Rapid Support Forces. It's got 3 artillery units. It should have only had. It only put 2 in. I added the 3rd one. I don't know why it knows it, but anyway, it says artillery geometry. Split the 3, but it only had 2. It didn't know there was 3. It did put 3 in before, but then it only put 2 in, and so I added another one. But it says split 3 RSF guns into 2. So 2 cover the south, 2 cover the east, southeast approaches. So that's the east and the southeast approaches. So it's talking about here. And 1 sits southwest, still 3 to 4 hexes off the ring, to create converging fires without clumping. It's sort of like, the benefits of creating converging fire without clumping. That sounds really good, but it doesn't have the ability to comprehend and figure that out. I mean, you could say that's just another narrative way of saying, we've got some artillery here and some artillery here. But the thing is, what's the point of giving me that advice? Because the artillery is pretty much already where it's suggesting it should be. You might have thought it would say something like, how about some further advice on your deployment? Why not deploy one of the artillery pieces to the north, so that you've got artillery that can cover both the north of the city and the south of the city? That might be sort of intelligent observation from ChatGTP based on the situation, as opposed to sort of, verbalisms of sort of, things that it might imagine should be said in a strategic discussion. So I'm really not sure that it would actually make a good counter AI target. I thought it would do, but now I'm beginning to think that it will sort of say clever things, and you realise that what it's doing is absolutely stupid. You know, point 3, interior reserves. Keep a couple of DJF, SAF stacks 1 hex deeper inside the city. Well, that's absolutely fantastic advice if you've got depth. But we're already clumped up. You know, there's nowhere to put anything as a reserve in that area. We've got the reserve. That is the reserve. These things here, you know, you might have thought it would say expand out so that you've got space to fall back and protect your reserves or something like that. And the 4th one is road interdiction. The east road is blocked nicely. Consider 1 mobile stack sat behind the southern cordon to pounce on any Zamzam sortie. That's Zamzam there. So it's talking the talk, but you sort of think, well, what is 1 stack going to do? I mean, why not say put a huge stack in Zamzam to stop them coming down the road south? So I like the way ChatGPT is doing it, but I think you've got to be sober enough to realise that it's sort of actually prosaic chat and not sort of Clausewitzian sort of strategic insight. Anyway, I leave it at that because I've got to do things, and but as I promise, my empty promises now to do much more, and I'll speak to you later. Cheerio.